Today I'll tell you how history can put you to sleep. For free *heyguys. So, welcome back. Or maybe welcome for the first time. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Tonight we're going to drift, very slowly, into one of the most over-celebrated, yet somehow strangely boring years in human history. Yes, 1776. The year that Americans love to tattoo on everything from t-shirts to trucks. The year of fireworks, declarations, and honestly, a lot of paperwork. So, dim the lights, tuck yourself in, maybe grab some tea that you'll probably forget about, and let turn cold. We're about to wander through the dull side of history's most overhyped year. And don't worry, there won't be any battles exploding in your ears. Just me, calmly dragging you through the long corridors of forgotten letters, minor figures, and endless committees. Because yes, the revolution was built on committees. And if that doesn't make you sleepy, I don't know what will. Now, most people think 1776 was just the Big Bang moment of American independence. Fireworks, bald eagles, George Washington riding a horse with perfect hair. But really, 1776 was also about people arguing for hours in hot rooms without air conditioning. It was about quills scratching on parchment. It was about wealthy men debating commas in a document. A lot of commas. So many commas. Asterisk, and, of course, we can't forget that most of those men were wearing wigs that looked like rejected sheep. Not glamorous sheep, just sort of. Beige, sad, and a little itchy. Asterisk anyway. Let's glide right into January of 1776. Asterisk. Asterisk # January 1776. Thomas Paine decides to complain in print. Asterisk so. Right at the start of the year, some guy named Thomas Paine publishes a pamphlet called Common Sense *. It's often credited with inspiring the American Revolution. But when you actually read it, it's kind of just a long, angry blog post. Paine basically says, hey, maybe we shouldn't let some king across the ocean tell us what to do. Revolutionary stuff, sure, but he goes on for pages and pages. And the funny thing is, it wasn't even new. People had been saying that for years in taverns, while drinking warm beer. Paine just wrote it down. Now, to his credit, Common Sense sold like crazy. Around 500,000 copies in a time when most people couldn't even spell their own name, which is impressive. But let's be real. Half the readers probably bought it, opened to the first page, saw the endless sentences, and decided, yeah, I'll just agree with everyone else and pretend I read it. Kind of like modern self-help books. Asterisk, but here's the boring fact. Paine wasn't even American. He was British. He only moved to America in 1774. 2 years later, he was basically like, hey guys, I know I'm new here, but let's overthrow the monarchy. And somehow people listened. It's like moving into a neighborhood and immediately starting a petition to bulldoze the HOA. Bold move. Tom, *, Congress in 1776. The world's longest meeting *. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress was doing what it did best. Sitting, talking, more sitting. They were the champions of long meetings. If you've ever been trapped in a Zoom call that should have been an email, imagine that. But with powdered wigs, ink stains, and way too much body odor. Because let's face it, deodorant wasn't a thing yet. So, January through June of 1776 was mostly just men arguing. Should they declare independence? Should they try one more polite letter to King George? Should they ask France for help? The answer was always, let's form another committee and talk about it. They had committees to decide when to meet, committees to decide what to eat, probably committees to decide which shade of beige to use on parchment. And in all this, George Washington was out in the field trying to keep his underpaid army from quitting. Imagine Washington writing letters like, "Hey guys, my soldiers don't have shoes," and Congress writing back, "We're forming a committee to discuss footwear. Please be patient." Speaking of Washington's army. Let's take a nap-worthy detour to George Washington himself. He's painted as this larger-than-life hero. But in 1776, he was mostly just stressed. Constantly stressed. His army was falling apart. Desertion was high. Supplies were low. And the British Army was basically the 18th century version of the New York Yankees. Too rich, too powerful, and annoyingly well-dressed. But Washington kept going. Mostly by yelling at people in very formal letters. And here's the boring fact. He was obsessed with discipline. He issued endless orders about soldiers not swearing, not drinking too much, and not, quote, relieving themselves in inappropriate places. You know things are dire when your commander spends half his time telling you where not to poop. July 2nd, the real Independence Day that nobody cares about now. Here's the fun part. Most people think July 4th is the big day. Fireworks, barbecue, all that. But the actual vote for independence happened on July 2nd, 1776. That's when Congress formally said, "Yep, we're independent." John Adams even wrote to his wife Abigail that July 2nd would be celebrated forever with parades, bells, and bonfires. Poor guy, wrong by 2 days. July 4th just became the famous date because that's when they approved the final wording of the Declaration of Independence. Basically, they spent 2 extra days editing, which, honestly, feels very on brand for a group of men who loved paperwork. So, the next time someone waves a flag on the 4th, just whisper to yourself, "It should have been the 2nd. Then watch as nobody cares. The Declaration of Independence. A giant group project. Let's talk about that document itself. Written mostly by Thomas Jefferson, who was 33 years old at the time. So yes, America's sacred founding text was basically written by a guy who would now be considered a young professional still figuring out his career. Jefferson got stuck with the assignment because he had good handwriting and was less annoying than John Adams. That's it. He turned in his draft, and then Congress spent days editing it, crossing out sentences, changing words, arguing about whether to insult King George too much or just a little. It was the ultimate group project. And, like all group projects, it ended with everyone hating each other a little more. Asterisk, the final version still called King George a tyrant. But they
welcome
cut
back.
Jefferson's section
If you're
blaming
still
him
awake,
for slavery.
impressive.
Which,
Honestly,
most
is
people
awkward
would have
considering
drifted
Jefferson
off halfway
himself
through
owned
Thomas
hundreds
Paine's
of enslaved
complaints.
people.
But here you
But
are.
sure, Tom,
Dedication,
blame the king.
or maybe insomnia.
And
Either
when the
way,
declaration
let's
was
keep
read
gliding
aloud
through
in
the
Philadelphia,
supremely average
people
events
cheered,
of
rang bells,
1776
and probably went
Asterisk,
back
we've
to
done
sweating in the
January
summer
to
heat.
July.
No
So
air
now
conditioning.
we head into the rest of the year.
Asterisk,
Spoiler alert.
More
Meanwhile,
meetings,
in
more
Britain,
letters,
Asterisk,
and a lot
here's
of marching
something nobody
around with
talks
very
about.
little happening.
In 1776,
it's like a Netflix series. The British
with
weren't
too many
really
filler
panicking.
episodes.
They thought the
Asterisk,
American
asterisk,
rebellion was just a small nuisance.
Bug bites,
like a
and
teenager
Washington's
storming
mood
out of the house
swings
saying,
asterisk, after
"I'm
the
independent
declaration
now,"
was signed,
while still
and
relying
read.
on mom
Everyone
to do
expected
laundry.
big changes.
Britain was busy
You
with
know,
bigger
instant
problems,
freedom,
like
maybe
running
a
a parade
massive
with
empire,
confetti.
and
Instead,
dealing with wars
life
in
looked
Europe.
exactly the
Asterisk,
same.
King
Britain
George
didn't
III,
suddenly vanish
often
into the
painted as
Atlantic.
some raging
Taxes
tyrant
didn't evaporate.
was actually
Soldiers
just a kind
didn't
of
magically
boring
get
family
shoes.
man.
He
Asterisk,
loved
George
farming.
Washington,
Yes,
meanwhile,
farming
was
the
doing
man
his
who
best
lost America
impression of a
spent most of his
stressed-out
time
dad.
obsessing
His
over
army was
crops,
camped around
soil,
New York,
and whether
swatting
his cows
mosquitoes,
were happy, waiting for the
Imagine
British
being
to make a
remembered
move.
in history as
Picture
the guy
thousands
who
of
lost
men
an
in
entire
wool uniforms
continent
in
while
July
checking on
heat
your carrots.
with very little
Asterisk,
soap.
asterisk,
If you're
hash,
trying
hash,
to
hash,
fall
other
asleep,
things happening
just
in
imagine the smell
1776
gently floating
that nobody
across the
remembers.
Hudson.
Asterisk,
Coming,
because yes,
isn't it? There's
asterisk,
more to
Washington's letters from this
1776
time
than
are
America's
basically long
fireworks.
size on
For
parchment.
example, complaints
Asterisk,
about
asterisk,
supplies,
in Austria,
pleas
Mozart
for
was busy
reinforcements,
composing
and
music
subtle
that
digs
would
at
actually
Congress,
last centuries,
which usually
Nobody
responded
in
by
Philadelphia
forming,
cared.
you guessed it,
Asterisk,
more
asterisk,
committees.
in England.
Asterisk,
Edward
asterisk,
Gibbon
hash,
published
hash,
the
hash,
first
enter the
volume
British,
of Asterisk,
the world's
the
worst
decline,
house guests,
and
fall of the
in
Roman
August.
Empire.
The British
Asterisk,
finally showed
a
up in
very
New
long
York with a
book that,
massive fleet.
ironically,
Over 30,000
outboard
troops,
Thomas Paine's, including
asterisk,
German
common
mercenaries
sense,
called Hessians.
Asterisk,
Imagine
asterisk,
Washington's
in Sweden.
tiny,
King
Half
Gustav
Gustav's
III
army
was
looking
reforming
across
laws,
the water
while
and
also
seeing
wearing
what basically
outfits so
amounted to the
elaborate they
18th
made
century
Versailles look
Avengers
underdressed.
assemble.
Asterisk,
Not great
asterisk,
for morale.
and
Asterisk,
in France,
the Battle of
the
Long
monarchy
Island
was
followed,
still spending
and
money
here's the boring
like there
fact.
was no tomorrow.
It wasn't even
Spoiler,
close.
there
the
wasn't
British
much of a
outflanked
tomorrow for
Washington
them.
in classic
Asterisk,
oops,
so
we
yes.
lost again
While
style.
Americans were
American
writing angry
troops
letters,
scattered.
the rest
Washington
of the world
had to
just
retreat,
kept doing its
which he
own
did.
thing.
In the
Asterisk,
middle of the night,
asterisk, and
across
that
the East
is
River,
where we'll
using
pause for
boats.
now.
We've only
Miraculously,
scratched the
nobody
surface
noticed.
of 1776,
Mostly because it was
the
foggy.
year that proves
So,
even
yes,
revolutions
one of the most
can
famous
be painfully
escapes in
bureaucratic.
history was courtesy
Next,
of
we'll
bad
drift
weather,
further into
heroism,
the endless
sure,
campaigns,
but also
forgotten generals,
clouds
and the
asterisk,
many,
and
many
after
times
that,
people
Washington
almost
basically
gave up,
spent months
but didn't.
retreating across
Asterisk.
New Jersey, town to town, always running just a little ahead of the British. It was like a very slow chase scene where nobody had good shoes. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 the life of a 1776 soldier spoiler. It was miserable asterisk if you think soldier life was exciting. Let me soothe you with the reality. It was mostly waiting, standing in formation, listening to orders, then more waiting. Food was bad, pay was late, and disease was everywhere. Dysentery, smallpox, fevers. Honestly, the bathroom situation alone could be its own horror story. Asterisk, and yet, Congress kept writing inspiring resolutions, as if words could magically replace rations. Imagine being half-starved and someone hands you another copy of the Declaration of Independence. Thanks, I'll just chew on the parchment. Very nutritious. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 Congress. Still talking. Asterisk back in Philadelphia. Congress was basically on its third season of endless debates. Now that independence was declared, they had to figure out how to govern, which meant committees again. Articles of Confederation were drafted. Endless discussions about states' rights, taxation, military funding. Asterisk, and remember, this was all done by candlelight. Picture men sweating in wool suits, arguing for hours about whether states should contribute equally or proportionally. Riveting, the kind of thing that will gently rock you into sleep if you imagine the voices droning on. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, hash, hash. Let's float over to John Adams' asterisk since we need to keep things personal. Let's check in on John Adams. In 1776, he was everywhere, writing letters, arguing in Congress, annoying almost everyone. Even his best allies thought he was a little much. Adams had that personality, smart, passionate, but just endlessly exhausting. Asterisk his wife Abigail, far away in Massachusetts, wrote him letters that were probably more interesting than anything he wrote back. She reminded him to remember the ladies, famously suggesting women's rights. Adams responded with a dismissive joke. Classic John. The man could argue liberty all day, but apparently thought equality was a bridge too far. Asterisk, so yes. One of the founding fathers was basically that guy in a meeting who talks too much, ignores good suggestions, and still somehow gets credit. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 Thomas Jefferson, the introvert with a violin. Asterisk, meanwhile, Jefferson was trying to avoid attention. He hated public speaking, preferred writing, and spent much of 1776 dealing with Virginia politics and tinkering with his violin. Yes, violin. The author of the Declaration of Independence was also basically your quiet friend who plays music in his room while everyone else is shouting. Asterisk Jefferson's diary entries from this year are painfully dull. Notes about weather, crops, occasional dinner guests. Imagine being in the middle of a revolution and writing, "It rained today. Corn looks fine." That's Jefferson. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 Benjamin Franklin, the cool grandpa. Asterisk. And then there's Franklin. Honestly, he was the only one who seemed to be enjoying himself. In 1776, he was sent to France to convince the French to support the revolution, which meant, essentially, hanging out in Paris salons, drinking wine, flirting, and telling witty stories. Franklin was like that one grandparent who just gets away with everything. Everyone loved him. Asterisk, so while soldiers froze in New Jersey, Franklin was probably sipping Bordeaux, charming French intellectuals, and inventing new excuses to stay out late. If anyone had the best 1776, it was definitely Franklin. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 the low point. Washington's retreat. Asterisk, by November, things looked bleak. Washington's army kept shrinking. Soldiers' enlistments were about to expire. The British had taken New York and seemed unstoppable. Washington himself admitted in letters that the cause looked hopeless. Asterisk, which, honestly, it kind of was. If the British had pressed harder, the whole rebellion might have collapsed right there. But the British were slow, overconfident, and not particularly eager to chase men through Jersey's swamps. So they sat back, assuming the rebellion would die on its own. Spoiler, it didn't. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 December 1776, the surprise everyone knows about asterisk finally, we reach December. Washington, desperate to save morale, planned a bold move, crossing the icy Delaware River on Christmas night to surprise the Hessians at Trenton. Now, this is the part history textbooks try to make sound exciting. The boats, the ice, the snow. But let's tone it down. In reality, it was freezing, miserable, and took forever. Soldiers slipped, equipment broke. Some men didn't even make it across. Washington himself probably spent the whole night wondering if this was a terrible idea. But somehow they did it. They surprised the Hessians, who were groggy from Christmas celebrations, and won a rare victory. Great. Wonderful. But here's the boring fact. It didn't change the war. The British still had New York. The Revolution was still on life support. Trenton was more like a morale booster. A small cup of coffee in a very long, drowsy day. Asterisk, hash, the year ends. With more paperwork, asterisk, and so 1776 closed. Not with fireworks, not with triumph, but with uncertainty. Congress kept writing. Washington kept worrying. Soldiers kept freezing. Britain kept underestimating. And most ordinary people just kept farming, living, and trying not to think too hard about politics. Asterisk, it was, in short, a very human year. Overhyped in hindsight, but in reality filled with endless details that nobody cared about at the time. The kind of year that historians love to dress up. But really, if you'd lived through it, you probably would have been more concerned with whether your shoes had holes. Asterisk, and that's where we'll pause again. Next time, we'll drift into the equally sleep-inducing world of 1777. Because yes, the revolution drags on. More letters, more arguments, more men marching in circles. Truly the stuff of dreams. Asterisk, so close your eyes. Think of a quill slowly scratching parchment and drift off. History will still be here in the morning. Asterisk. Hey again. Asterisk, if you're still here, congratulations. You either really like history, or you're very determined to fall asleep tonight. Either way, welcome back. We're gliding into 1777 now, which, spoiler alert, looks suspiciously like 1776. Same people, same wigs, same paperwork, but with slightly different weather. Asterisk, so let's dim the candlelight a little lower, settle back, and drift into another couple of years where the revolution trudged on, slowly, painfully, and often very, very boringly. Asterisk, hash, Washington still worrying asterisk as 1777 opened. George Washington was doing what he did best, stressing out. His army was still small, still poorly supplied, still mostly barefoot. Imagine thousands of men trying to march on muddy roads in socks. And yet, Washington kept writing long, formal letters begging Congress for shoes, food, and occasionally, common sense. Congress responded with inspiring resolutions, which, of course, were completely useless to a man trying to feed soldiers. Asterisk, so Washington's 1777 looked like 1776, just colder. Asterisk, hash, the British have a plan kind of asterisk meanwhile. The British thought they had a clever idea. They'd march down from Canada through New York and basically split the colonies in two. Easy, right? Except British generals had egos the size of entire continents. They argued, they changed plans, and eventually the whole thing turned into a logistical disaster. General Burgoyne, leading the march from Canada, thought it would be a walk in the park. He packed so much baggage that his army looked more like a traveling circus. There were officers' wives, fine clothes, even wine glasses. Because nothing says efficient military campaign like hauling furniture through forests. **# Congress. Still talking surprise * back in Philadelphia. Congress was debating again. Should they give Washington more power? Should they meddle in strategy? Should they eat lunch now or later? Endless questions. They even tried to micromanage troop movements, despite the fact that most of them couldn't tell the difference between a musket and a mop. *1 member, General Horatio Gates, thought he could do a better job than Washington. Congress kind of agreed, at least behind Washington's back. Office politics. But with MUSKETS. **# enter the Battle of Saratoga sort of exciting. But let's calm down now. 1777 did have one actual highlight. Saratoga. Burgoyne's Grand March ended in disaster when American forces surrounded him and forced a surrender. Textbooks call it the turning point of the war, which is true, but it's still basically thousands of men camping in the woods, firing at each other until the British realized they were trapped. The real drama? General Gates took most of the credit, even though other commanders, like Benedict Arnold, did the heavy lifting. Yes, that Benedict Arnold. The man who later became America's favorite traitor. But in 1777, he was still technically a hero. Of course, nobody gave him proper credit, which definitely didn't help his future mood. So Saratoga was a big deal, mostly because it convinced France to finally say, "Fine, we'll help you," which meant Franklin could keep partying in Paris with actual diplomatic purpose. **##. Meanwhile, Washington loses at Brandywine * while Burgoyne was surrendering up north. Washington was busy losing in Pennsylvania. The Battle of Brandywine was another case of the British outmaneuvering him. Philadelphia fell. Congress had to flee the city like awkward tenants behind on rent. They shuffled off to York, Pennsylvania, where, you guessed it, they kept debating. Washington, meanwhile, wrote more letters, probably sighed a lot, and told his soldiers to stay positive, which was difficult when you were eating boiled shoe leather for dinner. **##. Winter is coming. Valley Forge **. Then came the famous winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge. History books like to dramatize it, but let's keep it boringly real. It was cold. Supplies were low. Men built drafty huts and shivered. Disease spread. Morale plummeted. Every day was basically wake up, cough, hope for food, try not to die. Washington stayed with the army, pacing, writing more letters, and probably regretting life choices. His wife Martha even came to camp, knitting scarves and trying to make things slightly less depressing. The one bright spot? a Prussian officer named Baron von Steuben showed up. He didn't speak much English, but he knew how to drill an army. He cursed loudly in German, waved his cane, and somehow whipped the ragtag troops into something resembling a real fighting force. Which, honestly, was kind of a miracle. So yes, Valley Forge was miserable, but it was also where the army learned to march in straight lines without bumping into each other. Small victories. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, hash, hash. 1778, France joins the party asterisk thanks to Saratoga. And Franklin's relentless wine-drinking diplomacy, France officially allied with the Americans in 1778. This was huge. Suddenly, the rebellion had money, supplies, and eventually a navy. Britain, of course, was not thrilled. Asterisk, but for ordinary soldiers, nothing really changed overnight. They were still hungry, still cold, still writing home asking for socks. France's help was like ordering something online. It looked great on paper, but delivery took forever. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 the Battle of Monmouth. Summer sweating contest asterisk by June 1778. Washington's refreshed army marched out to fight the British at Monmouth, New Jersey. The battle itself was basically hours of men firing at each other in scorching heat. Soldiers collapsed from sunstroke. Horses died. Washington got so angry at one of his generals, Charles Lee, that he unleashed one of his rare public scoldings. Imagine being roasted by George Washington. Quiet, calm, but brutal. Asterisk, the battle ended in a stalemate. Both sides claimed victory, which is historian code for nothing really happened. But at least Washington's army didn't completely fall apart, which was progress. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 Congress. Forever congressing asterisk through it all, Congress kept talking, passing resolutions, issuing vague instructions, writing flowery letters to foreign courts. They even designed the Great Seal of the United States, complete with an eagle holding arrows and an olive branch. Very symbolic, not very useful if you're a soldier without shoes. Asterisk, so by the end of 1778, the revolution was still dragging on. Britain wasn't giving up. America wasn't collapsing. France was involved now. And Washington was still sighing. Asterisk, asterisk, hash, 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 another year down, asterisk, so what did 1777 and 1778 actually give us? A surrendered British army in the north, a half-frozen American army in the middle, a French alliance that looked better on paper than on the battlefield, and, of course, endless letters, committees, and debates. Asterisk, it was progress, technically, but slow, tedious progress. The kind of progress that makes you wonder if history textbooks just add exclamation points to keep kids from falling asleep. Asterisk, and that's where we'll pause again. Next time, we'll drift into the Southern campaigns, more betrayals, and more marching in circles. Because the revolution was nothing if not repetitive. So close your eyes, imagine snow crunching under bare feet, and let yourself drift off. The war will still be unresolved tomorrow, asterisk. Hey there again. If you're somehow still awake after 3 parts of endless committees, letters, and soldiers without shoes, you deserve a medal. But since we're still in the 1700s, you'll have to settle for another long, sleepy monologue. Tonight, we're floating into the years 1779 through 1781, the final stretch of the American Revolution. Though, to be honest, it felt less like a sprint to the finish and more like watching paint dry in real time. So, let's dim the lights a little more, settle deeper into your pillow, and drift into another round of marches, betrayals, and anticlimactic sieges. Hash, hash, hash. 1779, the year of not much happening. Let's start with 1779. A year that historians politely call uneventful. Translation: almost nothing happened. Washington's army sat around, still short on food, shoes, and enthusiasm. Congress kept writing letters full of flowery words nobody cared about. The British, meanwhile, tried some raids along the coast, burning towns here and there. More annoying than decisive. It was the kind of year where everyone was just tired. Soldiers, generals, even the British. People were basically asking, is this war still going on? Spoiler, yes. Hash, hash, hash. Benedict Arnold, America's favorite traitor, but of course, we can't skip Benedict Arnold. If this revolution were a Netflix series, he'd be the mid-season plot twist. Arnold had actually been one of Washington's best generals. Brave in battle, a bit reckless, always in the thick of the fight. But here's the boring fact. He never got the recognition he thought he deserved. Congress gave promotions to less competent men, ignored his achievements, and generally treated him like that one co-worker you rely on, but never thank. By 1779, Arnold was fed up. He also married a young woman from a loyalist family, which, in hindsight, might have been a clue. Soon he started plotting with the British. His big idea? Hand over the fort at West Point in exchange for money and a nice, comfortable life. The plan failed, of course. His British contact, Major John Andre, was captured. Arnold escaped, and voila, he became the symbol of treachery. Now, history books usually make this moment dramatic, but really, it was just another case of bad paperwork and poor timing. Arnold's letters were discovered, Washington shook his head, and everyone moved on. The war kept dragging. Arnold ended up in Britain, living unhappily, constantly complaining that nobody liked him. Which they didn't. So yes, America's great betrayal was less shocking plot twist and more workplace drama. Hash, hash, hash. Meanwhile, in the South, while Arnold was sulking and switching sides, the war shifted to the southern colonies. The British thought they'd find more loyalist support there. Spoiler, not really. 1779 and 1780 saw endless skirmishes in the Carolinas and Georgia. Hot, humid, mosquito-infested battles that nobody wanted to fight. Soldiers dropped from disease as often as bullets. The British captured Charleston in 1780, which looked impressive, but then got bogged down in endless guerrilla warfare. American partisans, like Francis Marion, the so-called swamp fox, spent their days hiding in swamps, launching surprise attacks, and then vanishing, which, honestly, sounds more like an annoying mosquito than a heroic figure. Effective, but hardly glamorous. Hash, hash, hash. Congress, guess what? Still talking back in Philadelphia. or wherever Congress had relocated that week, the delegates kept debating. Inflation was rising. Soldiers still weren't paid properly. Supplies were scarce. And instead of solving problems, Congress mostly issued more paper money, which quickly became worthless. So if you were a soldier in 1780, your pay might come in the form of colorful paper that nobody wanted to accept. Revolutionary spirit only goes so far when your family can't buy bread. Washington's mood in 1780. Washington himself spent most of 1780 writing even more letters. At this point, his entire life was basically wake up, sigh, write a letter about supplies, get ignored, repeat. He also had to deal with jealous generals, disloyal officers, and, of course, the sting of Arnold's betrayal. Washington took it personally, like a boss finding out his best employee just quit and joined the competitor. But he soldiered on because that's what Washington did best. 1781, the beginning of the end finally, at last. We reach 1781, the year everyone had been waiting for, even if they didn't know it. By now, France was more directly involved. French troops under Rochambeau joined Washington. A French fleet hovered round the coast. Suddenly, the Americans weren't quite so alone. The big event, of course, was Yorktown. But let's not rush, because nothing in this war ever happened quickly. Marching, always marching in the summer of 1781, Washington and the French decided to trick the British. Instead of attacking New York, where the British were heavily entrenched, they marched south toward Virginia. Imagine thousands of men trudging hundreds of miles in wool uniforms. Slow, hot, exhausting. The kind of march that makes you wonder why anyone ever thought this was a good idea. But it worked. The British commander, Lord Cornwallis, ended up bottled up at Yorktown. The Siege of Yorktown. Anticlimactic ending, no. Textbooks make Yorktown sound dramatic. Cannons booming, trenches dug, surrender inevitable. And yes, technically, it was the decisive battle of the war. But let's be real. It was a siege, which means a lot of waiting. Soldiers dug ditches. Cannons fired occasionally. People sat around, hungry and bored. Cornwallis hoped for reinforcements that never came. After weeks of this, he finally surrendered in October 1781. And that was it. The war wasn't officially over until 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, but Yorktown basically ended serious fighting. The British decided America wasn't worth the headache anymore. Washington didn't even get the moment. Fun fact. Cornwallis didn't even show up to his own surrender ceremony. He claimed illness and sent a deputy instead. Washington, annoyed, also sent one of his deputies to accept. So the big climactic moment of the war? A couple of second-in-command guys awkwardly exchanging swords. Very anticlimactic. The revolution wins down after Yorktown. Everyone was just tired. The British wanted peace. Americans wanted to go home. Congress wanted to keep arguing. Negotiations dragged on for 2 years, because of course they did. But for most people, 1781 was the real end. So yes, years of marching, letters, betrayals, and boredom ended not with a bang, but with paperwork, which, if you've been paying attention, was basically the theme of the entire revolution. Closing thoughts, sleepy, of course, so there you have it. From 1776 through 1781, the Glorious Revolution was mostly meetings, retreats, bad food, betrayal, and waiting. Sure, there were battles, but more often, there were just endless days of nothing. Soldiers staring at empty plates, congressmen staring at piles of paper, generals staring at maps and sighing. And somehow, through all of that, independence was won, not through glory or fireworks, but through sheer, stubborn endurance. So as you close your eyes tonight, remember, history is rarely exciting in real time. It's mostly boring details that only feel important in hindsight. And nothing is better for sleep than the sound of parchment rustling in a candlelit room. Good night, and may your dreams be less tedious than the year 1779. Hey again. If you're somehow still awake at this point, I salute you. Or maybe you're asleep, in which case, mission accomplished. Either way, we've trudged through 6 years of a war that somehow managed to be both important and incredibly boring at the same time. Now it's time to drift into the final chapter. The one with the least gunpowder and the most paperwork. The Treaty of Paris. Negotiations. Endless talking again. After Yorktown in 1781, the fighting basically stopped. But, and you probably saw this coming, the paperwork took forever. 2 whole years. The British, the French, the Spanish, and the Americans all had to sit around in Europe, drinking wine, staring at maps, and arguing over borders. It was diplomacy at its finest, which is to say, it was long, tedious, and filled with awkward pauses. Benjamin Franklin, of course, loved it. He was still in Paris, enjoying the lifestyle of silk coats and flirtations. John Adams was there too, being serious and cranky, because that's what John Adams did best. And John Jay joined them, mostly to add more Johns to the mix. The negotiations dragged on, not because of big disagreements, but because 18th century people liked to write letters, seal them with wax, send them by ship, and then wait months for a reply. Imagine sending an email today and getting a response in April of next year. That was diplomacy. Treaty of Paris. Finally signed date last. In September 1783, everyone agreed to stop pretending the war was still happening. The Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially recognized the United States as independent. Boundaries were drawn, debts were acknowledged, fishing rights were granted. Exciting? No. Important? Yes. But mostly it was just paperwork. And like all paperwork, not everyone read the fine print. Native nations were ignored, loyalists were mostly abandoned, and plenty of issues were left unresolved. But hey, at least the signatures looked nice. Washington's retirement tour with peace official. Washington finally got to do what he'd been dreaming of, resign. He handed back his commission to Congress in 1783. And because he loved dramatic understatement, he did it calmly, politely, with no big parade. He just said, basically, thanks, I'm done, and went back to Mount Vernon. It shocked the world. Here was a general who didn't want to be king, who actually walked away from power. Everyone in Europe thought this was the strangest, most boringly honorable thing they'd ever seen. Hash, hash, hash the soldiers. Less happy ending golf course. The soldiers didn't get such a neat ending. Many went home broke, unpaid, or landless. Some waited years for back pay. Others never saw it. Congress, true to form, issued more paper money nobody wanted. The revolutionary generation had sacrificed a lot, and in return they mostly got thank you speeches and poverty. Not quite the fireworks ending you read in textbooks. Hash, 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 the myth-making begins, and here's the real twist. The revolution itself had been slow, frustrating, and often depressing. But after it was over, Americans immediately started rewriting it into a glorious epic. Suddenly, the boring marches became heroic struggles. The endless debates became symbols of democracy. The ragged soldiers became noble patriots. History, as always, was edited for entertainment. Because let's be honest, if kids in school actually had to read about Congress arguing over shoe deliveries for 20 pages, nobody would stay awake. So the myth-making machine polished it all up, added dramatic flair, and ignored the fact that most of it had been a giant snooze fest. Hash, 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 the true legacy. Glorious boredom. So what do we take from all this? That revolutions aren't cinematic. They're messy, bureaucratic, and painfully slow. The American Revolution was won not through dazzling battles, but through sheer endurance, and through the ability of Washington to keep writing the same supply letter over and over again without throwing his quill across the room. The war was full of human flaws, jealous generals, stingy congressmen, and soldiers who just wanted a pair of shoes. And yet, somehow, out of all that, a country emerged. Asterisk sleepy closing thoughts, and that, dear listener, is the end. From 1776 to 1783, the story of America's Revolution is less fireworks and more candlelight. A long, flickering process that nearly went out a dozen times, but somehow kept burning dots. So tonight, as you drift off, remember, history isn't really made of big moments. It's made of thousands of small, boring ones. Meetings that never ended. Marches that went nowhere. Speeches nobody wanted to hear. And in that quiet, monotonous persistence, the world slowly, painfully changed. Good night. Sleep well. And may your dreams be slightly more interesting than the Treaty of Paris.